Roadkill, a chronicle of the Deadworld. Writer, Del Stone Jr. Artist, David Dorman. Notes: he's a Harley-riding, meat-hook-swinging, badass biker zombie by the name of Hitch. And in the early 1990s, he roared into the Deadworld universe on a mission to kill the Little Hitler and track down the mysterious Golem. Roadkill was the first installment of a triptych of zombie adventures, followed by December and Dead Heat. Hitch is the creation of noted cover artist Dave Dorman of Star Wars and Alien fame. Adding meat to the bones, pardon the pun, of Hitch's 3 installments is writer Del Stone Jr. Dead Heat went on to win the International Horror Guild's Award for Best First Novel. But all began at Caliber with Roadkill, the story of Hitch's battle with a neo-Nazi megalomaniac holed up in a Texas compound. Next time you're driving down the interstate and spot a biker on the gaunt side, check for the meat hook on a chain. Then steer clear. Del Stone Jr. Prologue. Life itself is but the shadow of death. Sir Thomas Browne. It is a tiny bug, really. A simple package of RNA designed to accomplish a specific purpose, created by acute minds with the very best of intentions. But it is a living thing, and life is opportunistic. It exploits, it changes, it adapts. It goes where it is not supposed to go. A tiny bug, really. Selected by decontamination procedures at a research facility in the Gibson Desert, west of Alice Springs, Australia. It enters an unprepared world. At first, it attacks rabbits, a long-time scourge of the island continent. But as life is wont, it changes, and the world is eclipsed by the shadow of death. Death becomes life. The dead become living. The living pray for death. And all is as it should not be. He was a solitary man living in a small town when the dead rose up. He bowled in a Friday night league. He carried a photograph of his ex-wife in his wallet. He roamed the back roads on a vintage motorcycle. So he was a lonely man. Often, he dreamed of leaving it all behind. He dreamed of climbing aboard his motorcycle and riding out of town, never to return. He would find happiness on the road. But he did not leave until the dead rose up. When the dead rose up, he did what every living person did. He fought. But the dead prevailed. So he climbed aboard his motorcycle and rode out of town, never to return. It had been his dream to leave it all behind. Now he was doing that. But his dream had become a nightmare, which ended, or began anew, on a rain-slick bend in the road when he came upon a mob of the dead and lost control of his motorcycle and crashed. He awakened to find them stripping his flesh. He felt nothing. He killed them and brushed the dirt from his jacket, and felt nothing. He saw that he had become one of them, and felt nothing. Yet he was different. Death had not robbed him of his mind, as it had the other dead ones. He felt nothing. Moreover, he could hear their feeble thoughts and make them do what he wanted. Still, he felt nothing. And finally, he saw that he felt nothing. Nothing at all. And that is when he did feel something, though he could not say what it was. Not then. Not yet. He could not be the man he had been in life. He could not go back. Yet, he needed something. The same something that had propelled him through his loneliness as a man. So he chose a new name for himself. He would be called Hitch. End of prologue. Roadkill. Kalamazoo, South Bend, Gary. Yellowed ivory finger bones, twisting, squeezing a black handle grip throttle. Danville, Terre Haute, Evansville. A dead tooth visible in the parabolic rearview mirror, drilled through the center. A gold H flush against the chipped enamel. It catches the sun when he tries to remember a smile. Paducah, Jackson, Memphis. Chewed black leather jacket and chaps eaten by asphalt, and other things. Little Rock, Hot Springs, Ardmore. The Harley-Davidson crest is silver against matte black on the numbered face of the tachometer as the needle swings right into the red line. Wichita Falls, Childress, Clarendon. Wind howling through the exposed wickets of his ribcage with an air raid siren wail, and his dead hair frizzing the slipstream over the jagged, scab-lipped crater dimpling his skull and his mouth, leaking old blood and new blood, clotted with the corpses of maggots and ants that could not find life in his dead flesh. And come he slow or come he fast, it is but death who comes at last. Hitch rolls like thunder across the land of the dead, going where he could go. The big Harley's extended forks pointing the way, and the murderous rumble of the V-twin engine carrying him to a place that he will do what he is supposed to do in this strange, inexplicable afterlife, where meaning will unfold and purpose will gather to shake the foundations of the world. He will know, at last, that he was meant to be. Not Michigan. Not there. Not with those others. No. Maybe here. Maybe now. Where is this place? Amarillo? What am I? Human? Zombie? Or something lost between? Do I laugh? Do I not laugh? What am I supposed to be? If there's nothing in life and nothing in death, then what is there? Why am I? Amarillo. The city as a scab on the horizon, open and vacant and lifeless as the field of bones that flank US 287 southeast of I-40. Empty skulls and upturned baskets of ribs and femurs, hollow as flutes. A seemingly endless prairie of sun-bleached, rain-washed bones. A massacre of some kind. A slaughter of continental proportions. An epic insanity. Here, outside Amarillo. Like no other catastrophe Hitch has seen. Not in his panic-stricken days as a live being, hunted by the remorseless horde. Or afterwards, when he moved among his destroyers like a prince, a general, capable of marshalling the troops. Or, mysterious in his indifference, a shaman, a ghost among ghosts, larger questions filling what remained of his lacerated mind. Afterwards, he had rolled across the United States of America on a Harley-Davidson motorcycle, and he had lived the terrible prophecies of the Book of Revelations, and never had he witnessed death on such a scale as here, outside Amarillo. And he was intrigued. Not frightened, not moved, only intrigued. Because this was power. This was Ragnarok. This was Shiva, the biblical angel of death. This was power that surpassed the simple needs of the walking dead, and the desperate fear of those remaining humans who walled themselves into isolated and hopeless fortresses. This was an antidote for that which those others, with their magical gates and arcane spells and dark armies, might set loose in the world. Insanity all over again. An end to this new order. Finally, an end to everything, if the crazy dead bastards in Michigan had their way. Hitch gazes across the field of bones. He did not know the answers to his questions, but he would not die again. Wind moans through the Harley's wire rims. The bike sits on its kickstand, canted slightly by the side of US 287. The sun has passed zenith and is falling in the direction of Amarillo, which shimmers in the distance, a phantom of a city floating in waves of convection that rise from the hot asphalt. Hitch takes in the grandeur of carnage around him. A beetle crawls from the eye socket of a charred skull. So they burn them somehow, and sees a rat's tooth glitter of light to the east, miles behind him on the highway. Sun reflecting off glass. A vehicle moving there. Too distant to make it out just yet, but coming his way. It wouldn't be them. Couldn't be them. Not this soon. Not before their precious gate was open. The vehicle moves closer. Hitch flicks away a cockroach that has scuttled onto the nosepiece of his Ray-Bans. A lens is missing, giving the landscape an artificial, three-dimensional aspect. A truck. Some kind of army job. Hitch hefts loops of chain, the meat hook dangling at the end like a stainless steel question mark. The truck is a military rig, probably a U.S. Army troop hauler. He can see a white star painted on the canvas coverall that stretches over the bed behind the big diesel stacks, which are blowing oil-black smoke. Army bases? Here? Amarillo? Lots of bases in San Anton and El Paso. But not here. Hitch fingers the chain. Humans, then. People. Soldiers, who won't be expecting death by Harley. He glances down at the meat hook. The tip catches the light and splits it cleanly into brilliant starburst that would hurt his eyes, if he could feel pain. Maybe they know what has happened here. The truck snakes around a bend in the road and begins a slow, laborious climb up a shallow grade, blowing a storm of clouds of exhaust in asthmatic gusts. They can spill their guts. The truck tops the rise, and Hitch can hear the transmission being run through the lower gears, the chassis shuddering as the driver downshifts and angles the big Chrysler toward the side of the road. Before I spill their guts. The snout of an M16 points from the passenger window. From the back, Hitch hears a confusion of voices, then angry, sawed-off shouts. Time to go to work. Another roadkill. Jesus Christ! Will you look at that? The meat hook whistles as it arcs through the air, begging a sound in response. The woody trunk of steel sinking into bone, the crack of bone giving way like rotted planks splitting, and the wet squelch of a man's face being torn off. Hitch whips the chain, and the bloody mask of flesh somersaults off the meat hook and splats against the hood, a gruesome ornament wearing an expression of utter shock. The man's finger spasms shut on the trigger, and his M16 sprays bullets up and over the truck, then down inside the cab, catching the driver just as he was about to fumble the door open. The driver's body jitterbugs, and then a mist of blood opaques the windshield. Somebody is jerking open the canvas coverall. A soldier tumbles out, stumbles, goes face down in the dirt with a yelp. Hitch doesn't wait for him to regain his balance. He leaps to the hood, then the roof, landing with a hollow boom, and punches through the canvas, groping and finding a head. He yanks. The soldier comes up through the canvas like a jack-in-the-box clown. Hitch has him by the throat and snatches the M16 from his hand. More troops boil out of the truck. The first is back on his feet and is raising his gun and cutting loose with a burst. Bullets slam into the soldier twisting in Hitch's grasp, and his eyes roll back in his sockets like boiled eggs, and his bladder cuts loose. Hitch slides sideways down the side of the cab. A fleeting glimpse inside. A wedge of the driver's exploded skull is lying on the dashboard, rocking slowly. And then he's under the truck, dangling from the transmission shaft, and crawling crab-like toward the rear, where he can see a set of legs. One man stoops and peers beneath the truck, and Hitch unslings the M16 and nearly cuts him in two. The others scatter, and Hitch picks them off with tight bursts, leading the angle shots, and aiming a little above the horizontal plane for the men running directly behind him. The last man goes down as he empties the magazine. Hitch lays the rifle on the asphalt and simply hangs there, beneath the truck, listening. To the quiet. The almost quiet. The truck engine ticks. Something drips. Wind hoots through the Harley's wire rims. Somebody moans. It is not one of the men Hitch shot. It is someone in the bed of the truck. Hitch takes up the meat hook and eases out from under the truck. He goes silently to the tailgate and crouches there and waits, listening. The human in the truck isn't moving. He or she is barely breathing, only muffled sobbing. Hitch risks a peek. She. Wrists cuffed by loops of plastic restrainments. Feet bound. The soldiers Hitch killed are beginning to stir. Soon they will be up and shambling about, and they will smell this woman in the truck, and they will descend on her like... Afterwards. His thoughts unspool to the recent past, to a night millions of years ago, but only a few short months by calendar reckoning, when he had laid out the Harley on a rain-slick mountain curve and clipped a guardrail with the side of his skull. No, not that. He scrambles into the truck. The woman peers over her shoulder at him. She's relatively young, possibly in her late 30s, zipped into a jumpsuit that conceals her physique. She has a Medusa's snarl of hair that nearly covers the cloth binding stretched between her lips. and when she sees him, she faints, just like the women in those 1950s killer B-monster movies. See that, Hitch? You still got it, kiddo. You can still make the ladies swoon. He tosses her over his shoulder. He picks an earwig that had crawled from beneath his teeth. He carries her into the afternoon. Later, on a slight rise, a pimple on the face of the Texas plain, Hitch sits and alternately watches the woman and the sun, which is vanishing behind low, purpled hills to the west. He has cleared a space for them among the bones, and on a whim, lined the clearing with human skulls, and, oddly, the burned black skull of a longhorn steer, which he placed in front of the bike. He doesn't know if that means anything, but it looks good there. He sits. A flight of bats crosses the sky, chasing the light. He hears mosquitoes and screwflies buzzing, but of course, they never bother him. Few pests like that bother him anymore. The occasional maggot falling dead in his mouth. A cockroach or an earwig rattling inside his skull. A man with a gun who might luck out and put a bullet through his brain. Only the dead bother Hitch now. Not the mindless hordes driven across the cities and suburbs by their simple imperative for human flesh. They don't threaten him. Indeed, he can direct them to do things for him if the need arises. But mostly he ignores them, moving among them like a ghost or a dream. It is the dead who make plans who bother him. The thinking dead. The dead who would give away this freedom of supremacy to serve masters who might yet destroy them once their gate into this world was open. The dead in Michigan. He resisted them. He tried to stop them. Now they have promised to track him like an animal and drive a stake through the remaining half of his brain. The thinking dead, as mindless and foolish as the zombies whose bones lie around him, and the people those bones were before, and afterwards. Afterwards. His thoughts skid away from the memory. The woman coughs. She groans and stretches. Hitch has removed her gag, but the wrist and foot bindings remain. She's lying on her left side, away from him. And as she awakens, she rolls to her back and sighs heavily, groaning again, her eyes winched shut. She lies that way a moment, then rolls sideways again to her right side, facing him, and draws her knees up to herself in a kneeling position. She shakes her head. Her hair yanks loose from the collar of her jumpsuit. She opens her eyes. He feels her gaze settle on him, the gravity of her terror deepening. "Oh, Christ," she whispered. "Oh, Jesus. What is this? What have I got myself into?" Hitch chuckles. "You're in a world of shit, lady." The whites of her eyes show, and the sudden slackness in her expression tells Hitch that she's about to pass out again. In a shadow of a movement, he's beside her, gripping her by the hair, pulling her head back so her throat lies exposed. He can see the mad pulse of her carotid, and he briefly wonders if it is sights such as these that drive the dead hordes into frenzies of feeding. He has never felt or even understood their passion for living flesh. Never. "You lose it, and I'll eat your heart out, lady," he whispers, pressing his lipless mouth against her ear. She swallows noisily. "Oh, Jesus, it's talking to me. The damn thing is talking to me. Christ help me! Hitch shakes his head. A cockroach skitters across his shoulder and disappears into the gathering darkness. Jesus can't help you now. Her eyes are lined with a wet shine. She stares straight into the sky, and her body is bored rigid, as if she fears any movement, no matter how slight or innocent, will provoke unthinkably horrible consequences. She finally stammers. What do you want? Hitch rocks back on his heels. He releases her, and her head lolls forward, her hair falling over her shoulders, and the disc in her neck adjusting with an audible pop. The sun sinks below the horizon, and a maroon shadow rolls across the fields of dead, firing the bones around them with an unnatural purple cast, that tony toy with an almost psychedelic luminescence. One thing, he says. She will not look at him. I want information. This is the way it goes. Christ, what the hell are you? I ask the questions. You answer. Just let me go, please. I have 2 kids back there. 2 children. Do you understand? They're just children. Answer my questions, and maybe I'll let you go. Please, the children. Answer my questions. What the hell are you? Answer my questions. What? What questions, for God's sake? Your name. My name? Your name, now. Dakota, okay? And please, no cracks about north or south. What are you doing here? Christ, you want my life history? Have you got that much time? What am I saying? You're dead. You've got all the time in the world. I came here from Florida. I'm a caseworker with HRS. That's the Department of Health and Rehabilitative Services. I sponsor abused kids. I had 2 of them with me the day the world ended. They're like little mice. Kelly and Amy. Kelly, the poor little guy. His mom was living with a crack addict, and the SOB had a penchant for burning him with cigarettes. And Amy? Well, her parents sexually abused her. Skip the sob stories and get to the point. What are you doing here? Okay. Jesus. The day the world ended, we got out of Florida. We thought it would be different outside Florida. But it wasn't. We made it to this place in Texas called Fairfield and joined up with a group of people operating out of a Methodist church. And we stayed there a long time, months and months, until the soldiers came and took us to Spandau. What is Spandau? You mean you don't know what's going on here? I'm new in town. You don't know about the Fuhrer? The Fourth Reich? Tell me. We've got all night. Jesus. Where do I begin? At the beginning. Well, let's see. Scuttlebutt has it that years before the world ended, the government built these things called restoration centers across the country. Self-contained facilities designed to reestablish civilization in case the Russians nuked us. They've got reactors, labs, garages, food, fuel, weapons, medical facilities. You name it. They're like small cities or fortresses when you consider they're surrounded by electric fences and guarded by thousands of soldiers. Spandau is one of these places. hidden in the old stockyards in Amarillo. It's better than the others because they've got oil wells and a pocket refinery running again. They've planted farms and rounded up wild cattle to get the herds rebuilt. I don't give a shit about all that. What is the Fourth Reich crap? Oh, you'll give a shit once you know what's going on. It started with that maniac who's running Spandau. He thinks he's the next Adolf Hitler. He goes by the title Führer. He's the one that named the place Spandau. Some of the others in the pens. Pens? Yes, pens. They kept slaves in the pens, which is where they put me after they took away. I'm sorry, I don't mean to cry. They took away Kelly and Amy. Keep talking. They called us laborers, which is better than being a breeder or a revisionist. Some of the others in the pens told me that the man's real name is Frederick Gerenz, the son of a Nazi engineer who came to the U.S. after World War II to do rocket research. Gerenz was transferred to Amarillo from Lawrence, Livermore, when the world ended. He's a physicist. He and his people built some kind of directed energy weapon that could knock down incoming ballistic missiles. The Pentagon wanted to keep him out of harm's way while the shit was hitting the fan, so they moved him to the Amarillo Restoration Center. Gerenz took over when the facility commander was killed in some kind of run-in with the locals. He was able to persuade the soldiers to throw in their lot with him, and most of them did. I guess I can understand why. The world was going to hell in a handbasket, and here you've got this articulate, intelligent man offering a way out. Hell, I'd probably have joined too, but not if I'd known what was coming down the pike afterwards. What do you mean? Well, they say power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. The people in the pens told me that once Gerenz took over, he became crazier and crazier. And that's when he renamed the camp Spandau and began talking about a Fourth Reich. When it became obvious there was no more Pentagon, no more America, no more anything, he realized he could have anything he wanted. He wants to rule the world. He wants to redesign the human race. He wants to get rid of people who don't fit the plan. It's right out of Mein Kampf. And personally, it scares the shit out of me, because I believe he can do it. The soldiers are rounding up every human being across the region and bringing them to Spandau to be brainwashed in the re-education schools. The ones who don't cooperate are sent to the revisionist pens, and the rumor mill has it that these people are used in genetic experiments, part of the Führer's master race program, before they're executed. Women who meet Gerenz's genetic profile become breeders. They're artificially inseminated with sperm from men who exhibit the same qualities. Oh God, it's a nightmare. Everyone else becomes a laborer or soldier. The man is insane. He's got zombies hanging in chain link cages across Spandau to remind people of what waits for them outside if they try to escape. He stomps around the camp in this gigantic diesel-powered walker they built in the labs. It's like something out of the War of the Worlds. Day and night, he's screaming orders and laughing through loudspeakers hooked up to the damn thing. He's worse than insane. He's dangerous. And that's why I need to get Kelly and Amy out of there. I tried to escape. I tried to go to find help, but they recaptured me. They were taking me back to Spandau when you came along. You've left out something. Oh? How do 4.5 billion zombies fit into the Führer's plan? Zombies? there won't be any zombies. You don't say. Listen, whatever you are. Let me tell you a story. We were taken from Fairfield and didn't reach Spandau until early the next morning. Kelly, Amy, and I were sitting in the bed of this truck, along with some of the others, and the soldiers who were guarding us. I noticed lightning in the distance, and one of the soldiers commented that we were almost home. We were approaching Spandau. Massed outside the electrified fence were hundreds of zombies, and they were wailing and screaming. Christ, I'll never forget that sound. There was a huge tower in the center of the camp, and situated at the top was some kind of machine with pipes and cables, and all kind of other gadgets connected to it. It looked like some kind of gun, with two big barrels on the front that moved up and down and around, like the guns of a battleship. As I watched, a bolt of light shot out. It was so bright it blinded me, as if a Klieg light inside my skull had been switched on. The landscape lit up like day, and there was a tremendous rumble of thunder. As the ray from this gun swept across the perimeter, the zombies closest to the fence suddenly burst into flames. They looked like they'd been doused in gasoline and set on fire. But as the ray moved across the zombies further back, something really weird happened. They stopped dead in their tracks, if you'll excuse the pun. And then, the zombies began to attack and eat each other. The soldier in the truck grinned and said, "Pretty neat, huh?" My stomach felt like a blender, chewing up something 3 days dead, and I had to fight to keep from puking. It was awful. They were tearing each other's heads off and sucking the marrow from the bones. And they were ripping arms and legs out of the sockets and chewing off ragged chunks of decayed flesh. Christ, it was a nightmare I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. To have to sit and watch that. The soldiers giggled and shouted over the sounds of the screams. The ray fries their brains. That's what the Fuhrer likes to do. Let them get real close to the fence and light them up. The ones that don't burn eat each other. What a fucking party, huh? They have a fancy name for this ray thing, but I forget what it is. Gurenz invented it at Lawrence Livermore, and you can see by all the bones out there, it works very well. This is where they bring the bodies every morning. They bulldoze them away from the fence and truck them out here and dump them. The zombies can't hurt Gurenz. He'll wipe them off the face of the earth, along with the rest of us. Tell you the truth, I don't really care what happens, so long as I can find Kelly and Amy and get the hell out of there. I just want to get out of there. Look, if there's any humanity left in you, I beg you to let me go. Let me try to get those kids out of there. Just let me do that. How are you going to do that? I don't know. Jesus Christ, I don't know. But I've got to try. I can't stop thinking about the mice. Mice? When I was a little girl, my mother bought me 2 white mice for pets. One morning I woke up to discover one of my mice had given birth during the night. 3 tiny pink baby mice. When I looked closer, I saw the other mouse in the cage had partially eaten them. Oh God, I think back to those innocent, helpless baby mice, and my heart screams. What did you do? I flushed them, and I'm still crying. Night has settled over the prairie. Hitch says nothing, but his thoughts are burning. The woman Dakota said it many times during the telling of her story. After the world ended. You're not like the other dead ones, she said. her eyes catching a faint glint of light from somewhere, perhaps the moon, and reflecting it as tiny dots of sepulchral incandescence. Her world ended at the moment his began. You're still able to think, to act. What are you? Before and afterwards. Nobody I've talked to has ever said anything about thinking zombies. A simple mechanic with a penchant for motorcycles and pizza with sausage and black olives, and a Friday night bowling league. No recent girlfriends, but that was okay. Why? She says, twisting on the ground to face him. Why are you different? Things fall apart and he's on the run, with no thought but escape. Flight. Got to get away from these dead bastards. A rainy night, slick roads, the Harley throwing spray up on his legs. A curve in the road. Shapes. Human shapes. A mob of human shapes in the road ahead of him. He stomps the brakes and the Harley slides out from under him, and he sees the guardrail rushing up to connect with his skull. A jarring impact, and then virtually nothing. Except maybe a dream of something horrible chewing the flesh from his arm. Why? And then he is awake and feeling nothing. Nothing at all. Numbness. A Novocaine paralysis that deadens every cell in his body, down to his thoughts, his feelings, all the parts of himself he's ever known. He sees a dead one eating the flesh off his arm, and he rams a fist through his skull with the casual indifference of swatting a gnat. The others walk away, disinterested now. He is one of them. Why are you different? She insists. Indeed, and he does not understand. He doesn't know. His heart tells him nothing. He is simply a force as arbitrary and capricious as the wind. Are there others like you? An image of a map of Michigan forms in his mind, veined with highways and state roads, and tumored with dots representing cities. If she only knew. Christ, she shakes her head. Say something, for God's sake. Just say something. Michigan. The road map in his mind is illuminated by a ray of light that burns across the entire state, flames eating the map into blackened wisps of fly ash. She whimpers and lays her head on the ground. Jesus, help me! A mosquito lands on his cheek and tries to find blood. It dies. All right then, stopping the bastards in Michigan. Let that be his purpose until he finds something better. Take me to Spandau, Hitch says. Deepest night. No headlight, but Hitch can see the road. The scattering of buildings. A solitary zombie stumbling through ruins, moving roughly in the direction of flickering lights on the horizon. Lightning? Too low in the sky for lightning. Too regular. An unnatural phenomenon, yes. But what is natural these days? They ride. The Harley's twin V thunders. Wind whips through Hitch's bones, breathing a low moan through the trued radius and ulna of his right arm. Woman Dakota is perched on a seat behind him, and she scrunches away from him to minimize contact. It neither offends nor pleases Hitch. Turn here, she shouts, pointing with both hands. He's undone her ankle restraints, but the bonds on her wrists remain. To a side road, flanked by fenced-in, Adobe-style apartments. He turns. The road snakes through shadows up a small rise and disappears at the crest. A nimbus of fuzzy, bluish light rises and falls above the crest. From there, you should be able to see Spandau. Hitch gives the throttle an anticipatory twist, and the Harley surges. The woman Dakota grabs him out of reflex, then just as quickly jerks her hands away. He sees her wiping them on the leg of her jumpsuit. He almost smiles. "Please don't take me any closer," she shouts. Even over the rumble of the engine and whistling wind, he can hear the terror in her voice. It is greater than her fear of him, perhaps greater than his fear of the forces at work in Michigan, the gateway dabblers who would wreck everything for some tenuous promise of reward. That's not right. He doesn't fear them. How can a thing that is dead know what fear is? It cannot be fear that drives him to preserve this non-existence, no matter how much he might like to believe that some vague shred of his past feelings and ambitions clings to his heart, as the strips of flesh clings to his arms and torso. He yanks in the clutch and chops the throttle, allowing the bike to glide to a stop. The woman Dakota is off and staggers before gaining her balance. Hitch walks the bike off the road and into a dark clutch of cedars growing beside an abandoned house. He comes back out to find her crouching on the sidewalk that parallels the street, her head swiveling back and forth, a look of unrefined horror on her face. "What?" She glances across the street. "Don't you hear it?" she whispers. "Something is out there, moving." Hitch stares into the gloom. He sees multitudes of rats dashing madly through the dried chickenweed of an abandoned yard, racing up the hill and over in a great hurry, as if some invisible tide were rising that they must escape. "What is it?" the woman Dakota hisses. Hitch grabs her by the arm and jerks her to her feet. "What's out there?" she whispers again, her eyes widening to almost comic proportions. "Zombies? You won't let them have me, will you? Please don't let them have me." "Shut your face and come with me." Hitch loops the meat hook chain through her wrist bindings and runs a padlock through the links, snapping it shut. He stalks up the sidewalk, half escorting, half dragging her with him. As they near the crest, she beckons him to a hedge of shaggy ligustrum growing as a living fence between two houses. She tiptoes through the grass and crouches among the knobby roots, wrapping her arms around her knees, and whispers, "For God's sake, I've done everything you asked me to do. Can't you let me go now? Haven't I at least earned a chance?" Hitch glares down at her, and she looks away. Her lower lip quivers, and her eyelids flutter rapidly. Hitch shakes his head. "Where is Spandau? I haven't seen Spandau." She squats there a moment, the bird-like flicking of her gaze betraying a war of decisions going on inside her head. Then she sucks in a deep breath and stands and straightens her spine and points with her two hands through the hedge. "It's there, damn it," she says aloud. "See for yourself." Hitch jams an arm through the waxy foliage and moves the branches aside, and stares into light. And sees a clearing of perhaps a quarter of a mile. Then a fence receding miles into the distance, topped with concertina wire. Heavy-duty insulators strung along the fence posts like Christmas ornaments. Thick wires, probably number 4 gauge, linking the insulators and dripping occasional showers of sparks as shambling human figures touch them. Searchlights. Everywhere searchlights, spraying their beams across the landscape outside the fence, dividing the night into slender cones of brilliant daylight. Men inside the fence aiming the lights, others shouting into megaphones. Hitch can hear their voices echoing across the clearing that separates the fenced-in area from the housing development where he stands, watching. He can't make out the words, but clearly detects the tone of discipline and authority in what they're saying. A machine strides into view, 15 feet tall, the color of beryllium, massive legs balanced on articulated footpads, a wide Charles Atlas torso ribbed with exhaust pipes that circulate over the shoulder and into the air, jointed arms reaching out with snapping pincers, and at top, an open cockpit, a man seated inside working controls. A big diesel engine rumbles and thunderstorms of smoke boil out of the exhaust. He's pointing the machine's arm at a mob of zombies slowly descending on the fence. 100 or so zombies. They are moving purposely toward the humans in the camp. Some of them may be stopped by the fence, but surely some will get inside. Maybe to be shot. Maybe to satisfy the need that drives them to risk a second death. A man in the walker leans his head down to the console and speaks. Then the entire sky blazes forth with a dazzling ray of intense light. Light that tears apart the spectrum, like the millisecond calamity of energy released when V hydrogen bomb is detonated. Shifting from blue to purple and twisting along an axis of radiance that seems to go transparent in its ferocious brilliance. A pulse of heat surges across the clearing, and a whack of thunder jolts the ground and surrounding houses. Everything is lit up in a preternatural glow, with huge bars of shadow slanting at shallow angles away from the clearing. The ray sweeps across the field of zombies like some kind of harvesting machine. The nearer ones go up like canisters of napalm and stumble crazily in every direction, to fall and give themselves to the fire, becoming individual pyres. Others dissolve into heaps of bone, the tiny strings of muscle and ligament holding them together withered and smoked away in the baking heat. The zombies toward the rear stop as if struck by a sudden thought, then turn and begin to eat one another. They swarm over themselves, tearing at the dead flesh of their companions, and gulping down moldless lumps of rotted gore in a frenzy of feeding that reminds Hitch of something he saw in the early days, just after everything changed. A United DC-10 made a belly landing on a clean, straightaway stretch of I-75 south of Toledo. The pilot did a beautiful job of bringing in the jet, and for a moment it looked like it might pull it off without killing anybody. But a wingtip dipped and caught a piece of the berm that bordered the road, and the wing ripped off, spraying JP-4 high into the air. And then there was a massive flash of fire like a bomb exploding, and the plane broke into segments that continued to hurl down the interstate. When everything stopped, people were crawling out of the wreckage. By some miracle, there were survivors. It looked like most of the people on the plane would walk away from the crash, until the zombies descended on them. They'd been watching from the fields on the other side of the highway, and even before the pieces of airplane had stopped tumbling, they were staggering out of the tall grass and across the puny wire fence that separated the fields from the interstate. The people on the airplane were dazed and confused, and they fled into their own slaughter. The ray shuts off, and once again the electric blue glare of the searchlights peels across the field, centering on the carnage of fire and scorched bone and crazed zombies tearing each other's throats out. The soldiers inside the fence are laughing and pointing. The man in the walker stomps out of view. Another ray bolt stabs in the opposite direction. Its source is a machine mounted atop a tall tower some distance from the fence. The ray sweeps the fence perimeter and beyond, swiveling back to clear space and out across the field. The rumble of expanding air arriving like the sound of an avalanche. It twitches in elevation, and a thin fringe of bluish-purple light flashes over the housing development. Hitch doubles over, exposed flanges reflexively wrapping around his cranium. His brain, what remains of his brain, begins to sizzle in his skull. Consciousness falling back into place, all the pieces fitting together in familiar patterns. Darkness, the stars glittering overhead. Dry stalks of chickweed prodding his arms. Somebody tugging at him, pulling at his arm. Eating his arm, gnawing at the bones, ripping gobbets of flesh and bloody ropes of muscle from the bone. Tearing, tearing, tearing. He jerks upright. The woman Dakota jumps and lets out a piping little gasp of terror and falls on her ass, backing away from him. She does not take her eyes from him. The woman Dakota, pulling at his arm. Not the zombies. Not what he had awakened to. Afterwards, after the wreck. After the world ended. Her words. Is this what he remembers to be fear? He gets to his feet and shakes his head. Dead earwigs fly out of his hair. The last time he felt like this was the night that he and Freddie Chalmers finished off a case of beer in his garage, rebuilding the carb on Freddie's '65 Chevelle. His brain is buzzing, and the world has taken on the unsettling instability of a freighter wallowing in 20-foot seas. The last few seconds, minutes, are lost to him. He remembers the ray sweeping across the field and flickering over the place where he was standing, followed by a moment of absolute disconnection where his brain didn't seem properly wired to his skull. And then a creeping, itching insanity that drove him to want to shed his flesh and escape this world. And when there was no escape, to attack, to kill, to destroy for nothing more than the sake of destruction. The feeling shuddered through him and gathered energy until he felt he might explode from the inside out. Until blackness fell over him. And he awakened to the woman, Dakota, trying to rouse him. Never in his new life had he felt such raw power. Not even when the gate dabblers had conjured their devil dogs and mages. A weapon. I want that machine. Back in the field of bones. Still dark. Hitch has unleashed the woman Dakota, and she hangs her head wearily, wrists propping on knees, long strands of hair dangling down the front of her jumpsuit. She needs water, something to eat, Hitch remembers. Maybe after they've talked. You can get me into Spandau. She offers a tired chuckle. I'm not going back there without a friggin' army. I'm your army. She looks up at him. Her eyes are hidden in sockets of shadow. I don't know what you are, but you're not an army. I'm the only army you're gonna find. I'll take my chances. He crosses the distance between them in a single ghost-like movement. He grabs her chin and squeezes, and forces her to stare into his eyes. This is your last chance. A spike of defiance lights her eyes. If you kill me, How do I get you inside? He holds her there a moment longer, then pushes her away. Were he human, he'd be pissed. But now, all he feels is a need to calculate. I'll help you rescue your brats. She shakes her head and laughs out loud this time. How the hell are you going to do that? Assuming I do get you past the gate, you'll be shot. I take it you're not immune to bullets. A bullet to the brain will punch my ticket, but I won't be shot if they're busy doing other things. Like what? Knitting? Better yet, killing me? Killing zombies. Oh, she waves her hand dismissively. Are you talking about that skirmish we saw tonight? That's nothing. That's a nightly ritual, regular as a dinner call. That isn't going to distract them for more than a few minutes. And those will be the few minutes we get inside. And then what? I capture your little Hitler. He and his ray weapon come with me. The brats go with you. End of story. She hangs her head again, shaking it, a wry smile forming at her lips. I can't believe this. I'm sitting here, negotiating with a zombie, who more than likely is going to kill me, even if he gets what he wants. That's part of the deal, Hitch interrupts. Give me what I want, and you and your brats live. The woman Dakota is silent a minute. Her throat works up and down as she swallows. She grimaces and licks her lips. Okay, let's say I agree to do this. How do I get you inside? Tell them you've seen what life is like on the outside, and you want to return. Take them something they want, something they need, in a vehicle. I hide inside. Something they need? Like what? Things living people need. You tell me. She ponders this a moment. You mean things like water? Food? They've already got that stuff. Toilet paper. Matches. Oh, well, sure. There are all kinds of things like that they can use. Toilet paper. Matches, maybe. They need insecticides and disinfectants, and batteries and salt. Insecticides, Hitch interrupts her. I passed chemical plants east of here. Chemical plants make pesticides. The woman Dakota shakes her head skeptically. So I come driving up to the gates of Spandau with a load of bug spray, and you hiding inside. Let's say that they let me in. Let's say they don't kill me. What then? How in the name of God is this Trojan horse keeper going to work? You take me inside, and I'll do the rest. She laughs again. Yeah, sure. You and your meat hook. Not only are you dead, she says desultorily, but you're crazy. Hitch stands, towering above her, the chains attached to the meat hook settling out with a metal rattle. He glares down at her. You want your brats? Kelly and Amy aren't brats. I'll get you your brats. But understand this. And he grips her chin again. There are things out there that make your little Hitler look like a Salvation Army bell ringer. These things have a plan for the world that doesn't include me, you, your brats, or that Nazi pipsqueak. If you know what's good for you, you'll do this. And if you don't... He pauses, more for effect than any attempt to organize his thoughts. I'll feed you to my friends and find another way inside. I don't trust you, she shoots back. Hitch lets go of her chin. What have you got to lose? The woman Dakota stares into the grainy darkness and says nothing. Daylight. Late morning. The sky is undiluted blue and spreads above Hitch, big as the universe, depthless and wanting for nothing but the expansion of his desire, which he expresses in a single, unspoken sentence. Come to me. He can feel the message spinning out of him, cycling up into the sky and circling away from him in concentric circles of thought. And he feels tens of thousands of pinpricks in response as the walking dead across the land stop in mid-shamble, pausing as if a rare idea has suddenly gotten through the decayed wreckage of their simple brains. Then turn and begin to slowly, but inexorably, trek toward Amarillo, Texas. The woman Dakota is waiting at a Care McGee plant 150 miles to the southeast, guarding a tanker truck filled with liquefied DDT that had been marked for export to Malaysia. She will stay there 3 days, then drive the truck to a point within the killing fields outside Amarillo, approaching from the northeast to avoid the soldiers, who mostly keep watch on the regions east and south of the city. He will meet her there. He will hide inside the tank. She will drive him to Spandau. Then he will summon the army he is massing. He has left her with food and water for 3 days. He knows she may not return, that she may simply drive in the opposite direction to search for help. He understood that when he negotiated the deal with her, and he made allowances for that eventuality. A stop at a mining company headquarters along the way on the long motorcycle drive from the Care McGee plant. On a whim, a stop at a leather shop at a factory outlet mall that advertised with billboards on the highway. If the woman Dakota does not come back, he can bully his way into Spandau, though the odds of getting what he wants will be drastically lowered. Drastically. To maybe no odds at all. 3 mornings, 3 afternoons, 3 nights. The killing fields are alive with movement, but no living thing moves there except rats as the walking dead gather and stand transfixed, as if hypnotized, or whacked out of some narcotic dream, swaying slowly to the pulse of Hitch's call. It's an ability he awakened with from his death. Maybe it is a facet of the same quirk of fate that allowed a part of his mind to remain intact, because all the thinking did can move the zombies. Call them. Make them go away. Make them stop. Simple, very simple commands that might be understood by a dog. In his mind's eye, he could see the rudiments of their selves, flickering atoms of wan light drifting slowly across the face of the earth. And by applying gentle pressure, he can make them do these simple things. Come to me. And they come. In singles or small groups, gathering in the killing fields outside Amarillo. 100, 1,000, 10,000. They continue to come. He sees some of their lights grow dim and wink out, and he knows these are the ones who have been intercepted by the patrols out of Spandau, and he expects the humans there have already grown curious, maybe even fearful, and are sending out wary feelers to the northeast. If so, let them be afraid, because on the 3rd morning, as the sun crawls above the horizon, scorching the countryside with hot Texas magentas, the killing fields, as far as Hitch can see, are swarming with every rotting horror imaginable. A farmer with a pitchfork embedded in his chest, the shaft snapped off and showing ragged whiskers of shredded wood. A policeman with a bloody stain surrounding his badge, a neat bullet hole punched through the metal just above the inscription, In God We Trust. A teenage girl with black and purple bruises spread in a many-fingered pattern across her throat. A thing half decayed, its bones the color of tobacco-stained dentures, and its white, patchy hair catching the wind and falling out at the roots like dandelion seeds to float away, still clutching a brown prescription bottle of Valium. An adult and 3 children, turned black, their skin the texture of bubble tar. And others, cowboys and housewives, and hookers and hamburger flippers at McDonald's. Tens of thousands of them, shuffling amid the bones of the killing fields, content for the moment to stand and listen to Hitch's call, and to obey nothing more than that simple imperative. An assemblage of dead that rivals the slow accretion of the killing fields, magnificent in their horribleness, beautiful in their entirety. And finally, a terrifying spectacle to cow the soldiers of Spandau, so they will not notice a single dark figure moving within their midst. Observations that Hitch can make but not appreciate, but for the fact they are there. His army has arrived. Hitch moves among the dead like a prophet, bestowing a select group of zombies with gifts he recovered on the trip back from the Care McGee plant. It is like passing out the blessings of the divinity. To each, a leather jacket, a red bandana, a length of ornamental heavy-gauge chain to be worn around the neck, and a very special bandolier. When he is finished, morning has given way to afternoon, and 25 zombies, looking for the world like an old Life magazine photograph of Hell's Angels strutting their colors for the camera, are standing before him. He whispers, "You are my skeleton crew." The woman Dakota may have sensed something in him, he tells himself. Some shred of his old self might remain. Echoes of his sense of humor, which was never well developed to begin with. Perhaps this, as he, was meant to be. He glances up at the sun. Shadows are leaning more toward the horizontal, and the light has taken out that thin, angular dimness that suggests dusk is closer at hand than he'd previously thought. The woman Dakota has not arrived. He forms an image of her in his mind, and prepares to embed that image in the feeble minds surrounding him, so that one day, perhaps, one of the many thousands of them will see her and remember her image, and make a special effort to kill her. But something makes him wait, and again he is struck by the notion that some part of him remains committed to the things he believed as a human being. Compassion? He shakes his head. A dead thing cannot understand compassion. A dead heart has no room for useless ideas. Night is only an hour or two from arriving. Hitch waits. The third night blows across the killing fields like cold winds fanning out before a thunderstorm. The air seems to crackle with latent energy, as if some hidden battery of violence were fully charged and awaiting the proper connections. Even the population of Spandau senses that something is wrong. Hitch sees searchlight beams playing frantically across the night sky miles in the distance, sweeping this way and that in hurried arcs, radiating like the glittering spokes of the rims of his Harley. Let them be afraid. The skeleton crew stands in a semicircle around him, leathered and darkly malevolent against the mass of common dead. He will be able to see them and call to them in the frenzy of fighting. But it will be better if it never came to that. It would be better if he can get inside the camp while the soldiers are distracted by this horrible display of deadness. Capture the little Hitler and disable the ray so that his thousands of friends can deal with the soldiers. Then he will take the little Hitler and the ray weapon on a road trip. North. But he must get inside first. He must capture the little Hitler alive. Because to overwhelm the camp by force and have this man eaten alive by a dead one would be a terrible blow. A blow to the purpose he declared when the woman Dakota finished telling her story. The woman Dakota. She hasn't arrived, and he cannot wait. Very well, then. He, too, will take his chances. Hitch stands and raises his arms to the sky, the stars, the bowl of the night. He forms a single thought, a simple command to come, which he prepares to dispense to his tens of thousands of followers. And then he hears it. Air horns. Headlights drilling through the night. The rumbling burble of a diesel in low gear. The truck crawls up the road toward the spot where he had told the woman Dakota to meet him. The fender slimy with entrails and hanging beards of thatched hair and bone splinters. Hitch leaps onto the step by the cab and taps on the window. The woman Dakota cracks the glass and shouts hysterically through the gap. "What in the name of God is going on here? You didn't say anything about this." "My army," he hisses back at her. "You're late." Her eyes are round as saucers. Their hugeness accentuates her cheekbones. Hitch wonders what her skull looks like beneath that layer of flesh. "Jesus Christ!" she shouts. "They wouldn't move out of the way. I had to run over about 1,000 of them to get here." She grips herself and shivers. "This is making me very nervous. What's to keep them from swarming over this truck and sucking me out like a pimento in a cocktail olive?" "One thing. Me." She doesn't seem comforted. "This is never going to work. Guerens will fry their brains." "I'm ready to begin," he tells her. "Are you?" She nods hesitantly. "Then I'll hide inside the tank. As we approach the gate, blow the horn 3 times. Once we're inside, blow the horn once. After the truck has stopped, I'll wait a few minutes before climbing out. My friends will keep the soldiers occupied while I recover your Fuhrer. If you want your brats, you better have them ready to go, because I will not wait for you again. Do you understand?" Again, the hesitant nod. Hitch says nothing further. He climbs out of the tank and catwalks to the hatch and undogs it. The chemical fog blows out and unravels to the wispy wind. He looks a final time at the searchlight beams glowing faintly to the southwest. Let them be afraid. Then he slips inside and slams the hatch closed. It is like death inside the tank. Death-like, like the act of dying. The phasing out of perception, and the grainy onset of unconsciousness when the senses finally let go, and meaning falls out of the vocabulary of sight, and sound, and touch, and the brain takes one last slide down the greasy concavity of the skull to settle with an unspoken sigh into the release that is death. Except there is movement, swayings and thumps, and sudden stops or starts that send currents racing through the tank that pull at the body and churn the oily liquid to a froth. It deadens the sound of everything except its own tumultuous roar, and it reduces the universe to nothing but the skiddy metal confines of the tank. The shaking and turbulence subside to a dull, somnambulistic throb, punctuated with occasional thumps, and leaning to this side or that. Then long straightaways of throbbing, throbbing, throbbing. the waves of vibration penetrating to the center of the bone and working up the vertebrae of the spine to the base of the skull in a subtle conspiracy of modulation. A shift in inertia, and the mass of pesticides surges forward. 3 muffled blasts of an air horn. A downshifting, then another, and another. The pesticide sloshes back and forth in the tank, rocking it slightly. Nothing for many minutes. Then a slow acceleration and a current in the poison driving the body back toward the rear of the tank. 1 blast of the horn. All stop. They're inside. Hitch hides at the back of the tank, waiting. Again, it is like death inside. He sees a shaft of light descend into the tank. Somebody has opened the hatch. Flashlight beams waggle through the murky, oily liquid, exposing debris suspended in the pesticide, shining like the dust that floats in a slab of late afternoon sunlight. The hatch slams shut. He can only hear a soft thud. Darkness crashes down over him. Hitch waits. Hitch feels his way up the ladder inside the black tank and fumbles for the latching mechanism. The gear tries to stick, and he dogs it a little, pushing quietly with his fist, understanding that somebody outside may be watching. Not for long, though. He began calling his friends when a Dakota woman signaled with the horn that they were inside the gate. That was roughly an hour ago, though he cannot be sure of the time, or anything else while hidden inside the inky solitude of the tank truck. At their shambling pace, it might take an hour for them to reach the clearing, where searchlights will pick them out of the darkness. By then, every human in the camp capable of hoisting a gun, every human a little Hitler might trust, that is, should be at the fence, preparing for the onslaught. The latch twists free with a faint metal shriek. Hitch pauses for several seconds and listens, but beyond the sound of DDT leaking from his ribcage and dripping from his jacket, he hears nothing. He raises the hatch cover. Nothing. The truck is parked in a garage. The concrete floor reflects antiseptic light from bars of fluorescence overhead. Barrels line the wall. A door at the far end of the garage is marked Exit. Apart from those things, there are no other furnishings of any sort. Hitch climbs out of the tank and takes in the room. Something does not feel right about this, but he can't identify the source of his unease. A dead cockroach slides out of his ear and down the contour of his cheek to splat wetly on the aluminum tank top. Hitch takes a step toward the back of the tank, and his boot sounds ring loudly against the walls. Too loudly. At that moment, he realizes he hears no sound at all, neither from inside the garage nor beyond its walls, as if the entire camp has come to a standstill and was waiting for something. Waiting. Something whistles through the air. His gaze twitches ceilingward a hair's breadth of a second before a broad net, woven of thick steel cables, slams into him, driving him to his knees with a bone-jarring thud, and knocking him down the side of the tank to crash to the concrete. The truck windows explode out of their frames with a concussive whoomp, and a metallic wham shakes the walls as the net smashes into the truck and folds in from the sides, jerking Hitch taut against the dusty rear tires. Soldiers leap out from behind the barrels lining the walls, and the door at the far end of the garage flies open, and more soldiers pour in. An officer begins to scream, "Don't shoot! Don't shoot the damn thing!" And Hitch reaches for his meat hook. The chain is tangled in the net. He pulls at the net, trying to lift it over his head, but the soldiers are holding down the edges, so he grabs the steel cables and tries to tear a hole through the mesh. Individual strands unravel and pop, but the cables hold. Hitch hooks an arm around the top of the tire and hangs on. In half a second, he seizes and rejects a rushing onset of escape schemes. And when the idea occurs to him, he actually pauses a moment to wonder why he hadn't thought of it earlier. He slides his right arm through the mesh and slams his fist into the side of the tank. The metal skin gives way with a screeching cacophony, and a geyser of pesticide explodes from the puncture, spraying across the smooth concrete floor, sweeping out toward the soldiers in a noxious, poisonous wave that instantly renders the air inside the garage unbreathable. The soldiers pause, their expressions melting like wax into caricatures of bravado. Then the officer lets fly with a high-pitched B-movie scream. "Get out! Get the fuck out of here!" And the soldiers are scrambling for the door at the far end, half running and half sliding in the oily spray, gagging as they skitter to get outside. Hitch begins to methodically untangle himself from the net, shaking his head to clear his vision as the blast of DDT from the tank hammers him from the back. The net comes away easily now, as he works at it slowly. The meat hook chain settles with a heavy clank as it comes loose from the strands. A soldier falls by the door. His skin tones have faded from healthy tan to a sickly green pallor, and a line of drool sways from his chin. He brings the muzzle of his automatic up, and aiming it unsteadily at Hitch. "No, no, don't shoot!" the officer screams. A muzzle flash, and a sharp crack, and then a chuffing cough as a thin veneer of blue flame races across the lake of poison, its petrochemical base igniting greedily, and whips up the surging arc of spray with a gathering roar as Hitch casts off the last steel cable and hurls himself away. Simultaneously, a stunning pulse of light and a wall of thunderous concussion simply erase the world as 10,000 gallons of flammable pesticide go up in a spasm of combustion. And Hitch feels himself being thrown into bright nothingness. Fire. Everywhere fire. Hitch does not feel it, but he sees the leather jacket starting to blacken around the edges, and he sees the lank strands of his hair shriveling to gnarled stubs, and he knows the fire might eventually cook what remains of his brain. Afterwards. After the accident. After he left the other half of his brain hooked and dangling on the curved lip of a guardrail, and awakened to find zombies stripping his flesh. So he stumbles through the wreckage of the building, climbing over the ruined walls and steel girders that have collapsed and twisted in on themselves. And he emerges into the cool night, where steam cooks off his baking clothes and shrouds him with smoke, as if he were an apparition coalescing from the heated air. And men scatter, screaming and shouting orders, and dragging fire hoses to attack the inferno behind him. Hitch staggers away from the disaster. His leg isn't working right, but he can't decide what has happened because he feels no pain. And he hobbles towards an alley dividing two nearby garages and simply leans against the thin, corrugated aluminum siding, hidden from sight in the capering glow of the fire. For long moments he can see nothing but dazzle spots centered in his field of vision. But as his eyesight clears, he makes out squads of soldiers organizing firefighting brigades. The confusion of shouting has died down a little as the men get to the business of fighting the blaze. But from somewhere else, a scream corkscrews into the night. A man screaming. A man dying. Hitch feels nothing, not even a flare of anger when his thoughts drift to the obvious explanation of all this. The woman Dakota. She betrayed him. She told them about him, and they prepared a trap. And now she and her brats would die with everyone else in the facility. Everyone but the little Hitler. He flings a silent command across the night to the dead hordes slowly bearing down on the camp. Come to me. Quickly, a click, a hum. Then he hears the electric whir of servo motors kicking on, and giant molybdenum steel pincers clamp shut across his chest, pinning his arms to his side. A diesel engine thunders into life, and running lights blaze on, outshining the pyre still raging beyond the alley. The Fuhrer's walker. Hitch tries to twist out of the grappler's arm's grasp, and cannot move. A few more foot-pounds of pressure, and the bones in his arms will snap like termite-eaten 2x4s. The diesel powers up, and the arm lifts him into the air. And he's looking at the piggishly pink face of the Fuhrer Gerenz, who leans over the walker's console and stares myopically at him through thick-lensed glasses. The little Hitler smiles triumphantly, his tiny eyes glittering blackly in their sockets. He says, "I've been waiting for you." Hitch lies on a stainless steel table, staring into a circle of light diffused over a shiny steel fixture that hangs above him, blotting out nearly everything else he can see above him. He is nearly cocooned in layers of chain the soldiers used to bind him once the little Hitler had captured him. He cannot break the chains. He cannot move. Peripherally, he could see men in dirty white lab coats moving about the room, lined with similar tables and stand-mounted light fixtures. Boxes are stacked nearly to the ceiling along the walls, and at the far end of the room, he can barely make out the thick metal door that looks menacingly cumbersome, like the door to a bank vault. A tiny window in the door shows blue pilot light flames glowing serenely. An incinerator. A heavy, industrial-strength job. This is where they dispose of their dead, he decides. A commotion stirs at the other side of the room, and the men in lab coats hurry out of the way. A knot of soldiers is entering and fanning out along the walls, their guns pointed ceilingward, and their eyes darting like nervous minnows fleeing a bigger fish. The little Hitler strides into the room. He's small in stature, a round and flabby man with a soft and scrub-clean air about him, and he's packed into a too tight black uniform that features double rows of lightning bolts on the sleeves. But it is his eyes that betray the hardness in him. Sunken in his oval face, they resemble the eyes of a thinker, a man who has knowledge and forms his opinions quickly, and does not deviate from those opinions. Not ever. No matter what. In life, Hitch would have despised his kind. In death, Hitch could give a shit. He moves around the room's perimeter, greeting and shaking the hands of the lab-coated doctors and technicians standing off to the side. When he is finished, he moves slowly toward the table, drifting around it at a respectful distance, his hands folded prissily behind his back. His boots clicking against the concrete floor is the only sound in the room. His gaze does not waver from Hitch's eyes. He stops behind Hitch and said, "The woman was not able to give us your name. I assume you have a name." Hitch stares at the light. It sways slightly in the still air for no apparent reason. "I have to call you something," the little Hitler says, adding a patronizing emphasis to the word something. "Perhaps Mr. Doe will do." "Doe, a deer, a female deer," he sing-songs. "Mr. Dead Doe." One of the technicians chuckles quietly. "You are a remarkable creature, Mr. Dead Doe," the little Hitler continues, clicking closer. "More of your kind, and I wouldn't need armies or PRG emitters or nuclear weapons. I could merely turn you loose and let you do what you do." He leans very close to Hitch's ear and whispers, "By that, I mean killing, Mr. Dead Doe. You are a killer, aren't you?" Hitch stares into the light. The little Hitler leans that way a moment longer, and when Hitch does not answer, he sighs and stands and clicks away to resume circling the table. "Yes, Mr. Doe, you are a remarkable creature, an intelligent zombie, or as we like to say here at Spandau, a mortally impaired individual. I prefer that term to the uncouth vernacular zombie. Don't you? The end of the world is no reason to completely disavow the civilized amenities of language, is it?" Hitch wonders if this man has no end to his questions. "Intelligent, yes," the little Hitler muses, "but not as intelligent as I," and he leans right into Hitch's face, a smile dividing his piggish features into flaps of loose flesh. "I had a difficult time believing the woman when she told us about you. But if you were as smart and as physically powerful as she suggested, then I had reason to doubt our little reception for you in the containment building would succeed. So I asked myself, where would I go if I escaped the containment building? And I knew that would be the most immediate and accessible place of hiding. So I positioned myself in the darkness between the buildings, and I waited for you with my airboat on battery standby." He stands erect and addresses the lab personnel and soldiers with a mirthless laugh and a sweep of his arm. "And you came to me, Mr. Dead Doe. You came to me." The people in the room applauded boisterously. The little Hitler offers his audience an exaggerated bow, and then returns his attention to Hitch. "And now you are here," he continues, indicating the room with another sweep of his arm. "You'll forgive the lack of creature comforts, for as necropsy laboratories go, it serves our purposes, and it will serve yours once you've answered a few questions. Tell me, Mr. Dead Doe," he goes on quickly, "how is it that you continue to think in your mortally impaired state, unlike your mindless compatriots we shovel away from the fences every morning? What quality is it that separates you from them? Are there more of you? How many? What brings you to the Fourth Reich? Were you looking for work, Mr. Dead Doe? Because if you were, I must warn you, we're strictly a non-union shop here. No overtime, no pension plan, no dental coverage. You have such fascinating teeth, Mr. Dead Doe," the little Hitler whispers mischievously, leaning over Hitch's face and peering into his eyes. "Did you have the gold letter done before or after?" Afterwards. Hitch feels something stir within him, some feeling. He would have called it hatred in his former life. He draws a breath of air deep inside him, using his diaphragm, and lets it out into an explosive, barking cough. The little Hitler's face is instantly covered with flecks of rotted lung tissue and the corpses of maggots. His expression goes rigid. He takes 2 steps back and stops. The soldiers drop to a crouch and aim their M16s at Hitch. A lab-coated tech scuttles over and offers a towel to the Fuhrer. He wipes his face, making a slow production of the matter, even cleaning out the folds in his ears and the slick-down surface of his hair. He takes a pocket mirror from his jacket and restores his hair to its former oily primness. When he finishes, he gives himself a critical going over in the mirror, then snaps the case shut and slides it back into his pocket. A look of cheerful indifference forms in his eyes. "I suppose, like so many of the lost souls roaming the world today, you were denied the courtesy of an autopsy at the time of your passing. This is an oversight we'd like to redress." He strides to the foot of the table and stares across the knobby links of chain binding Hitch to look directly into his eyes. You see, Mr. Deaddoe, I have a vision for the world, and it is a vision for the living, exclusively. I see mankind, under my tutelage, reestablishing itself from sea to shining sea, if you'll forgive the cliché. Building great cities and flying to the stars, and partaking of the benefits our grand intellect has to offer us, so that we may become a race of travelers and philosophers and poets who are at peace with both the world and ourselves. The first step to realizing this vision is the elimination of threats to our tenuous existence. We have taken great pains to organize ourselves and to assemble an arsenal with which we may scour clean the earth and make it safe for ourselves. The PRG emitter on the tower outside, the device that turns the mortally impaired upon themselves, is but one of many approaches we are using to attack this problem. The L-boats, mechanical walkers, to you, allow us to walk above the dead and slay them at our leisure. We are also attempting to develop a kind of living dead killer that could be released into the world to go about its work unsupervised. We haven't yet perfected the technique, but at the very least, we're emptying our ranks of political dissenters and malcontents by using those people as test subjects. Every dark cloud has its silver lining, eh, Mr. Deaddoe? I am telling you this because I'm anxious to know what makes you tick, Mr. Deaddoe. I want to know if you're a freak of nature, a product of unhappy circumstance, or whether you represent some escalation in the revivification process. Either way, we must know the hows and whys of your condition, because, as I said, Mr. Deaddoe, you're a remarkable creature. I don't expect you'll offer this information to us, but the answers may come in the necropsy. But wouldn't it be so much easier if you simply told us? Hitch says nothing. The overhead light has become a halo encircling his consciousness. The little Hitler's gaze darts to the foremost doctor standing by the wall. He snaps to the man. Cut him open. Cut the bastard open and find out why he's so smart. And while you're at it, find out why he's so stupid. Hitch cannot move. Metal locking screws have been tightened against his skull, and a framework assembly arches above his head in a collection of gleaming, threaded shafts and mounting brackets that almost resembles a crown, lending the effect of a dying king. The light fixture has been pulled lower and the hood adjusted in such a way as to focus the light into a tight shaft of brilliance that seems to bore through his eyes and illuminate the shreds of his brain. The rest of the room has been darkened, and the remaining tables trail off into the grainy shadows like mausoleum slabs. The doctors have wheeled a cart alongside the table. He hears the rattle of metal tools, the elastic snap of rubber gloves being pulled on, and the buzzing whine of a bone saw running through its paces. In the quiet, in the looming dark, it all seems very distant. Hitch feels a faint glimmer of what he remembers to be amazement. None of what is happening troubles him greatly. He senses a detachment between his awareness and his body, as if he had joined the gallery of technicians standing like hobgoblins just outside the circle of light, and will watch the proceedings with the same morbid curiosity he expects they're feeling. Somebody releases a shuddery sigh. This gives me the fucking creeps, a lab technician whispers hoarsely to another white-suited technician standing next to him. Who knows what that thing is, or what it's going to do when we saw off the top of its head? The other man nods and swallows noisily. Mr. Hammonds, if you please, a voice directly behind Hitch says distractedly. It is the medical examiner, chief of the lab. Leave your reservations at the door. We are scientists conducting an inquiry into an observable phenomenon. Not, and his voice becomes very pointed, medieval bloodletters pondering the issue of bodily humors. The man seems to shrink back into shadows and mumbles, "Yes, sir." Then the room becomes quiet, and the silence amplifies small noises. The scrape of a shoe against the floor, the hoarse whisper of men breathing through face masks, the stealthy ticks and groans creeping through the building itself. The others outside the light have crowded together, and Hitch can see real apprehension beginning to congeal in their expressions. One of them lets his gaze wander to other parts of the room, as if he hears something out there in all that blackness, something trying to move closer without being seen or heard. "They look at me as a monster," Hitch says to himself. The darkness breathes deeper. Somebody in the room cuts loose a squeaking fart, and the lab techs titter nervously. The medical examiner sets down a tool with a metal clank and says, "Gentlemen, please." Then, "Mr. Hammonds, will you come here? I need you to fasten this locking pin against the subject's skull." The lab technician moves forward until he enters the circle of light, and then he stops. He doesn't seem able to take his eyes from Hitch. The doctor stops what he's doing. "Mr. Hammonds?" The lab tech's eyes are wide and glassy. The muscles in his face are rigid. He takes a shallow breath and shakes his head no, a gesture that comes and goes so quickly it is almost imperceptible. "Is there a problem, Mr. Hammonds?" "I don't want to touch it," the man says in a thin whisper. The doctor pulls down his face mask. His voice suddenly becomes clearer. "You don't want to touch what?" "It," the man hisses, pointing at Hitch. "That thing." "Thing. Yes." The doctor sighs. "Mr. Hammonds, are you referring to the animated corpse? Because if you are, I can promise you it is securely bound." "It's weird. It's different," the man blurts, an edge of panic creeping into his voice. "It's not like the others. Can't you see it? For God's sake, look at its eyes. It's listening to us." He pauses to take a jittery swallow, and his Adam's apple juts from his throat like a huge, out-of-control tumor. "It's watching us." "Yes, I am. And if you'll come closer, I'll prove it to you." "That's enough, Mr. Hammonds," the doctor barks. "The rest of you, stop cowering like sheep and get over here." And he beckons to them with a quick jerk of his hand. They shuffle closer, but not by much. "Let me explain this situation to you," he says. "What we have here is an animated corpse, reputed to be an intelligent animated corpse. We've been given the task of determining the mechanism for its intelligence, and that is exactly what I intend to do, with your gentleman's able assistance. Using this," he continues, hefting the bone saw as if it were a Mixmaster mixer, "I will produce an aperture into the right perennial eminence and attempt to determine the condition of his cranial interior. I am taking this cautious approach because I do not want to damage or in any way alter the cranial environment. After I have completed my examination, I will decide on a subsequent course of action." The doctor pauses, and Hitch senses he is searching for words. "I want to stress that what we're doing here constitutes a simple necropsy. Granted, the subject differs uniquely from other subjects we've examined, but it is not the boogeyman." "Yes, I am." "It won't jump out of your closet at night to eat you." "Are you sure?" "It cannot hurt you." "You want to lay odds on that?" and it shouldn't frighten you. Watch this. Hitch lets fly with an ear-splitting howl that warbles up and down the scale, and simultaneously he heaves at the chains, twisting his body like a caterpillar writhing inside a steel cocoon. The isolation unit gripping his skull rips off its mounts with a steel clatter and falls apart into a loud cacophony of crashing metal tubes and braces. A moment of paralyzed silence. Then, the lab technicians as a single body turn and run. They don't gasp. They don't scream. They just run. Except for Mr. Hammonds. He cannot seem to move at all. Then his eyes roll back in the sockets, and his knees give out, and he falls dead to the floor. In another time, Hitch would have laughed. The medical examiner leans over Hitch's face, his expression neutral, and he says in a totally nonplussed tone of voice, "That was remarkable. Will you do that again?" The door to the laboratory bangs open. Soldiers barge in, their guns leveled at the ready. The little Hitler strides into the room. "You'll finish your examination another time, doctor," he winks at the medical examiner. "I am inviting your patient to a slaughter." Outside. Night. Atop the tower that oversees the entire installation. A cold wind whips across the flatlands and flows into Spandau, over and around the buildings and cattle pens jammed with living human beings and the caged zombies hanging like zoo animals throughout the camp. It knifes through the struts and braces that support the raid machine and swirls around the body of the machine itself, as if the machine were a center of low pressure sucking in air to expel it in the form of light and heat. The soldiers have chained Hitch to a steel railing that surrounds the tower platform. The little Hitler stands off to the side, flanked by soldiers who are scanning the horizon with starlight scopes. Two soldiers are sitting at a tracking and aiming console bolted to the machine. The machine swings back and forth on a swivel mount, its barrels rising and dipping like a dog sniffing the wind. The woman Dakota stands behind the little Hitler. She steals a glance at Hitch and quickly looks away, running her fingers through her hair distractedly. He watches her and notices that he's hoping she'll look his way again. He forms a mental picture of her wriggling like a flounder on a bar point of his meat hook, and he realizes that he enjoys the feeling of this surrogate vengeance, and that it's an entirely human instinct. Yes, a bit of humanity remaining within him. Life persisting in a dead man. Perhaps a seed that will later sprout anew. "I will not die again." The little Hitler shouts to Hitch, "I wanted you to have an up-close and personal introduction to my brainchild, Mr. Dead Doe." He pats the machine on its metal flank. "This is the engine of our conquest, Mr. Dead Doe. The PRG emitter. Don't ask me what the PRG abbreviates. That is what the hacks at the Pentagon called it during my tenure at Lawrence Livermore. To me, it is a simple death ray, and I'm pleased to report it works with equal effectiveness on the living and the mortally impaired. God, I love that term, don't you?" He squeals laughter. At any rate, it was entirely by coincidence that we discovered it could be used against the mortally impaired, to wonderful effect. On a night like this one, with the barbarians massing at the gates and threatening to overrun the fences, we tried it as a weapon of final resort. A shot in the dark, as it were. His face blooms with glee, and he turns to the soldiers scanning the horizon. "Did you hear that? A shot in the dark. A pun. I am a punster." The soldiers nod and offer forced smiles. I never cease to amaze myself, the little Hitler chuckles. And I hope you, Mr. Dead Doe, will be amazed by what you are about to see. And even you, he turns to the woman Dakota. Believe it or not, I have brought the two of you here for the same reason. The woman Dakota scrunches her eyebrows into a baffled frown. She murmurs, I don't understand. The little Hitler gives her a mirthless smile. You see, it's this way. Experience has taught me that if you want to make a lasting impression on somebody, you show rather than tell. For example, if I had a missile I wanted to sell the Air Force, I let them see how it blows up airplanes before giving them the sales pitch. And that's what I hope to do with the two of you. His smile fades into a cold, almost inhuman smirk. I hope to make an impression. I've already seen what this thing can do, the woman Dakota says hesitantly, shrinking away from the machine. We had a deal. You let me and my kids go in exchange for... She nods, but does not look at Hitch. Him. I have already done that, the little Hitler cries expansively. At least partly so. The woman Dakota looks confused. I don't understand. Your children, he says. His smile has deepened to something a lot colder than friendliness. We put them outside the gate half an hour ago. They're free. The woman Dakota's face collapses into utter shock. She clutches at her stomach, and her mouth unhinges so that her jaw sags, and the wind seems to go out of her so that she's gasping like a fish tossed on the beach. There are 100,000 zombies out there, she screams, and she lunges at him and screams again. I'll fucking kill you! A soldier raises his gun over his shoulder like a baseball bat and smashes her over the head. The butt strikes her skull with the sound of an infield double, and she goes down to her knees, groping at the hard metal grating with fingers hooked into claws. Then she's crawling toward the little Hitler and bleating in a slurred, nearly incoherent voice. Kill you. Kill you. The little Hitler steps back and says coldly, Madam, perhaps you should have told us that when you arrived earlier tonight, among other things. He strides over to the machine and extracts a microphone from the dizzying blur of electronic gizmos and gigads on the console. Turn on the searchlights, he says into the microphone. And his voice, eerily distorted by the wind, echoes across the camp. Light blazes forth, and the zombie horde jumps into stark electric relief. The earth is covered with them, a plague of zombies as far as the light can show them, fading into the dark, which coyly tricks the eye into perceiving still greater masses of the walking dead approaching from beyond the light's reach. The zombies move slowly toward the fence, thousands stacked upon thousands, and even the soldiers manning the raid machine draw in a squeaky, shocked breath at the sight of them. Hitch scans the mob and picks out a scattering of black jackets and bandanas. He renews his mental whisper that they come, that they push their decomposed bodies all the way to the fence. But then we've known all along that an unusual gathering of the mortally impaired was taking place, the little Hitler sing-songs. Had you been more honest with us, madam, we might have been inclined to live up to the spirit, if not the letter, of our bargain. He sighs. But you were not entirely honest with us. True, the point is moot now that all the pieces are on the board, and the game is about to begin. Still, I want to reward you for your dishonesty, and I have done that by giving you what you asked for. When we are finished here, I will fulfill the last part of our bargain by tossing your traitorous ass over the fence." He glares at the woman Dakota as she kneels on the platform grating. His officious effect vanishes, and undiluted hatred curls his features. "You don't fuck with me and live to brag about it." All at once, the smile is back. He whips around to Hitch and quickly says, "Just as I've made an indelible impression on a lady, I hope to do the same to you, Mr. Dead Doe. My guess is you're responsible for the gathering outside the fence. You really should learn to choose your friends more carefully, because friends who could do nothing for you are useless. And these creatures are as useless to you as dental floss, Mr. Dead Doe. I take it you don't lie awake at night worrying about tooth decay," he says lightly. "A little joke." He walks over to the soldiers manning the ray machine console. He whispers to them, and they begin flipping switches and punching buttons. Telltales on the console blink from red to green, and the machine seems to come alive, filling the air with a vibrating hum that hints at 10,000s of kilowatts waiting at the standby, ready to be unleashed. "As I said, Mr. Dead Doe," the little Hitler speaks to Hitch, "I hope to make an impression. When we met earlier tonight, I posed several questions to you. Questions you have not answered. So I want to show you, up close and personal, what will happen to you if you continue this, conspiracy of silence." He turns to the soldiers. "Go ahead, show him." They pull tinted goggles over their eyes. The soldier in the right seat reaches for a handle grip throttle that reminds Hitch of one of his Harleys, and he pulls the grip shut. And the world is turned inside out by light. The entire tower shudders as the ray machine hurls a tremendous bolt of energy into the mass of zombies pushing up to the fence. The light is so intense that even Hitch must turn away momentarily, and a suffocating wave of heat blows back from the barrels, carried by a clap of gigantic thunder that must be shaking the ground itself. Hitch cannot remember experiencing such raw, unmitigated power, not even as a living being when he worked around the highway haulers, the Macs and Peterbilts driven by their massive diesel engines. The energy pouring out of the gun goes beyond his ability to imagine how horrible it must be for the idiot zombies who even now are shrinking back from the fence. The nearest ones consumed by fire, and the others running amok with the throngs and tearing at each other or themselves in a crazed orgy of feasting. "Talk to me, Mr. Dead Doe," the little Hitler screeches over the roar. "Tell me all about yourself." A tremendous explosion among the zombies sends debris flying into the air. A wave of concussion sweeps across the camp and rattles the tower, knocking the ray machine off kilter. Its beam sprays uselessly into the sky for a moment, and in that brief splinter of time, Hitch spots a clutch of his black-jacketed skeleton crew ambling toward the fence. "What the fuck was that?" the little Hitler screams at the soldiers. "I don't know, sir. Something blew up out there. Maybe they've got howitzers." "They're too goddamn stupid to use artillery, you idiot," the little Hitler rages. "Unless this bastard," he jabs a finger at Hitch, "taught them some new trick. We can't let them get into the camp. Start at the fence and work your way back and blast the motherfuckers. Barbecue them." The soldiers realign the array and send another roaring lance of energy burning through the howling zombies. The beam sears across the walking corpses and reaches the skeleton crew, and boils them into flaming pyres. A series of thunderous blasts rock the camp perimeter, tearing the fence wide open in a convulsion of sparks and smoke. Searchlights explode in geysers of incandescent flames. Bits of metal and human remains whistle through the night sky, and a slate of shrapnel peppers the tower, which is rocking on its girders and groaning as if it might totter and crash to the ground. The ray machine spins on its mount and sends a burning trail of light cutting across the camp itself. A tank farm goes up with a terrific whoomp of sudden combustion, and a ball of fire slowly blooms in the night, illuminating the land for miles around. Zombies are stumbling through the gap in the fence. Hitch is slammed into the metal railing around the platform. The tower leans in the opposite direction, and he regains his balance and struggles to break free of the cocoon of chains binding him. The little Hitler is down on one knee on the other side of the platform. His arm is up, a trembling finger pointing at Hitch. He screams, "You!" His eyes seem to burn with a monstrously hot steel mill glow. "You planted explosives on the motherfuckers, you dead bastard!" His gaze skitters across the platform and settles on one of the soldiers guarding the woman, Dakota. He snatches a grenade from the soldier's chest strap and staggers across the wobbling platform, like a drunk trying to negotiate the deck of a ship caught in a hurricane. "Here's a little something for your trouble, asshole," he shrieks, and pulls the pin on the grenade. He crams it into Hitch's mouth, knocking out a tooth in the process. And then he slams his body into Hitch. Hitch does a somersault over the railing. Gravity does the rest. Falling, falling, falling. That disconnected feeling again. The sensation of body and mind separating from the concurrent detachment that occurs only when death seems imminent and the thought must divorce itself from the flesh or go down in ruin. Like skidding into a guardrail, a steel beam scooping out part of his brain like a glistening ball of pink sherbet. And then awakening from death to find the idiot zombies licking the shiny, fleshless bones in his forearm and sucking the meat off his fingers as if they were working on a stick of strawberry licorice. Afterwards, "I will not die again." And the subtext to that premise, "I am afraid." Hitch seems to fall in slow motion. War perception floods in at double time, and he notices many strange things on the way down. Mobs of zombies pushing through the breach in the fence. A figure rushing into the elevator car at the top of the platform, and the car sliding down the shaft like a greased turd. A tower beginning to tilt at a bend in the girders halfway down. The twinkling muzzle flash of an automatic weapon on the platform. The ray machine tilting up, aiming its death beam straight at heaven. An angry wisp of smoke curling from the grenade. Hitch slams into the ground. The force of impact seems to knock the earth from its axis, and for half a second he simply lies there, trying to separate up from down. The grenade has popped out of his mouth and is lying in the dirt next to him. He rolls his body over it, and is blown into the air by a wall of noise and energy. He smacks the ground again, and the outside layer of chains falls away from his body like an old snakeskin. Again, a moment of brain lapse. Then he sees the chains that have been broken, and he begins rolling across the dirt, unspooling himself until he can move his arms and tear apart the remaining links. Free. He is free. All around him, soldiers are running pell-mell and shooting. Bodies are scattered across the clearing that surrounds the tower. More explosions cut through the air in stroboscopic flashes and claps of thunder. Living men begin to scream. The dead are pouring through the fence now, and the soldiers are blasting at them with machine guns and grenades. But they are slowly falling back as the mob of zombies piles over the bodies of the fallen and spills inside the perimeter, driven mad by the desire for flesh. Hitch tries to stand, and his leg goes out from under him. The femur is splintered. He could see ragged edges of bone jutting through his leather chaps. He drags himself up and begins to hobble toward the row of wooden buildings. And a soldier rushes up to him, his eyes wide with terror, and screams, "You're not my CO! Where's my CO?" A whiff of recognition settles in his eyes, and he whispers, "My God, you're dead." Hitch jams his index finger into the man's eye with a liquid squish and pushes all the way to the brain. The man drops limply and soundlessly to the ground. He grabs the man's gun and tries to strap it to his leg using the man's belt. But the shape is all wrong. Too bulky and loose-fitting to work as a splint. Hitch sees nothing else he can use. He looks again at the soldier. Necessity is the mother of invention. He strips off the man's BDUs. He takes the man's left leg in a firm grip and twists. Tendons pop like rifle shots. The hip joint gives way with a woody crack. He twists the leg 360 degrees and pulls hard, planting his foot in the soldier's sternum. The flesh begins to tear, and the sound reminds Hitch of when he was a boy and the afternoons he spent pulling weeds in his mother's flower garden, the roots coming out only grudgingly with a muffled, complaining grumble. The leg suddenly rips free, and Hitch loses his balance and falls. Wet tatters of flesh slap him across the face. Hitch takes the leg in his hands and breaks it at the knee, snapping it in two. He tosses away the lower leg and foot and pushes the femur out of the surrounding slab of muscle and fat. The bone straps nicely to his thigh. He stands and takes in the chaos around him. The soldiers have broken into ragged fire lines that are falling apart even as Hitch watches. Tanks are clanking into the fray now, using flamethrowers to spew fire into the advancing zombies. The tower elevator doors open, and Hitch spots the dark-suited figure of the little Hitler dashing across the clearing toward the hangars at the camp's interior. A line of bullets spatters the ground behind him, and Hitch spots a figure on the tower stairwell, the woman Dakota lining up for another shot with a machine gun. A metal scream. The tower girders above the woman Dakota are bending and folding in on themselves. The ray machine sends a wand of light streaking across the night. And then the tower snaps in two, and the top half swings out and over its vertical axis, and plunges earthward. The ray machine tears loose from its mounts with a flashbulb detonation of electric bolts, and the entire mass hurtles into the scattering of troops and the advancing zombie throngs, and vanishes in a blistering mushroom of cloud fire. Hitch staggers toward the slaughterhouse. He has seen the door open, an ingot of light against the flaming dark, and a little Hitler dash inside, swinging the door shut behind him. Everything was gone now. Almost. The ray machine was a twisted pile of smoking metal. The woman Dakota surely had been incinerated by the explosion. Spandau itself was falling to the zombies. Gunfire and explosions still crackle across the compound, and somebody had released the humans in the pens, because Hitch can see civilians sprinting between the buildings, snatching up guns from fallen soldiers to kill zombies. Somebody starts a truck, an army job similar to the one Hitch had encountered, what seems like years ago, and makes a dash through an undamaged stretch of fence, tearing down long strands of wire in the process. The truck bogs down in sand, and zombies besiege the screaming driver. It is all slipping through Hitch's finger bones. But there is still the little Hitler, the Führer Gerenz, who could build another ray machine, who could go with him to Michigan and help him put a stop to the business up there that's threatening them all, who could then die for the good of mankind, and more importantly, the good of dead kind. Hitch makes his way past the cattle pens. Longhorn cattle stampede in terror away from the fence as he hobbles by. He reaches the edge of the building and works his way to the door. He throws it open and stands to the side, half expecting a volley of bullets. A chilly draft of misty air blows out, but that is all. He peeks inside. Long rows of gutted cattle swing from meat hooks suspended on chains that hang from metal tracks, crisscrossing the ceiling. A wall is covered with rows of cow tongues and throats. Wire mesh bins filled with testicles line a far wall. Ropes of intestines hang like garland from ceiling-mounted racks. Everything seems to be moving, ever so slightly, as if the sawed-up, sliced-open hunks of cattle flesh were struggling to rise from the dead. Hitch eases inside and slips quietly among the carcasses. He finds a meat hook embedded in a slab of beef and rips it out. Farther down the row, he comes across a serpentine length of chain lying on the floor. He bends open the last link, runs it through the eye link in the meat hook, and crimps it shut. Not as elegant as his old rig, but is a weapon he knows how to use. He continues silently down the rows. A furtive patter of clicks at the other end of the building. Hitch stops, listens. The murmur of chains squeaking. He bends down and peers behind the swaying carcasses. Nothing. A drop of blood swells the lip of a huge, ragged cut in the carcass nearest him, then plunks to the grating below. Hitch listens. A muffled clatter of machine gun fire outside. A sawed-off yelp. A whisper of a giggle inside the building. He skitters beneath the carcasses and moves toward the wall. The sound of his shuffling seems preternaturally loud in light of the noisy thunder of the battle outside. But with the broken leg, he can't help but drag his foot. He jumps across a clear space and flattens himself against a wall, which seems to squish behind him. Eyes. Rows of cows' eyes fixed on pitons, dripping mucus in their sad, eternal stares. They seem to be watching him. A metal clank reverberates across the slaughterhouse, and Hitch uses the break in silence to limp down the wall, the meat hook glistening in his hand, and the chain looped around his wrist. At the far end of the room, he could see a figure moving in a small office off to the side, hiding beneath a desk. He sees the person's foot slowly drawing into the shadows where an office chair would fit. Hitch creeps as silently as his crippled gait will allow, and when he reaches the window to the office that looks out on the slaughterhouse, he ducks below the opaque partition at the bottom and slithers snake-like across the blood-stained concrete. The rough shape of a plan forms in his mind. He will leap inside and flip the desk on its side before the little Hitler has a chance to get off a clean shot, and then disarm him. After that, depending on the events outside, he'll play it by ear. He tenses. He can hear ragged breathing, and he knows it isn't his. He jumps. A shape darts from beneath the desk and screams, No, no, no! It's a boy. A young boy, trembling and goggle-eyed with hysteria. A tremor grabs and shakes the entire building as if a gigantic hand had reached down and tried to lift it from its concrete foundation. And the near wall gives way with a screeching sound of torn metal as a giant manipulator claw rips apart the corrugated siding. Hitch struggles to his feet, and the angry roar of a diesel fills the slaughterhouse. The mechanical walker punches its way into the building, flinging debris out of its way with broad sweeps of its molybdenum arms. The little Hitler grins down at Hitch from the cockpit. "You really have fucked things up for me," he booms from the loudspeaker bolted to the walker's shoulder. "Now I'm gonna fuck things up for you." Hitch unlimbers the meat hook and starts swinging. "You can't kill him, no matter what. You kill him, and everything is lost." The walker's arm swats carcasses out of the way, and they go careening across the room to smack into the rack of cattle eyeballs, which spring off the board and roll across the slaughterhouse floor like a spilled bag of marbles. The diesel shrieks and blows clouds of blue smoke that billow up around the fluorescence. The walker stomps toward Hitch. He feints to the right near the office wall, then hurls himself to the left and swings the meat hook. If he can attach it to the thing's leg and wrap the chain around the other, maybe he can trip the walker and pounce on a little Hitler. The hook slides uselessly down the walker's leg. A claw rises ceilingward, and Hitch rolls desperately. The claw hammers into the concrete scant inches from Hitch's skull, landing with such force that Hitch actually bounces from the impact. He reels in the chain and breaks into a crippled lope down the rows of carcasses as the walker stomps after him. "Come back and play, fucker!" the little Hitler screams through the loudspeaker. "The game's not over." The walker pauses in its pursuit. The little Hitler manipulates its claws to rip a bloody carcass from the meat rack, raise it over the walker, and hurl it down the corridor. Hitch ducks as it sails over his head and crashes to the floor, thudding into the opposite wall. "The game's not over," the little Hitler screeches, and then breaks into gurgling laughter. Hitch veers to the rows of slaughtered cattle, hoping to find a place there where he can hide and get behind the walker. Tripping the machine doesn't seem a workable plan, but if he can use his meat hook as a grapple, loop it into the cockpit, and scale the machine's back, maybe he can get that little Hitler before the bastard puts a bullet through his skull. The walker plods down the corridor, smashing aside carcasses. A slab of beef hurtles through the window of the office, smashing the window into millions of flinders of scintillating shards, and part of Hitch wonders if the boy were still hiding there. "A new game?" the little Hitler hisses. "Hide, go seek? Come out wherever you are, Mr. Dead Doe." Hitch creeps through the rows. The walker stomps nearer. It stops. Hitch freezes. The diesel idles as if in contemplation. Hitch tries to steal a peek around the swinging bodies. "What are you doing now?" He sees a claw reaching to the rail in the ceiling that suspends the gutted cattle bodies. The diesel throttles up. The claw grabs hold of the rail and jerks down. The rail pops out of the ceiling in a shower of masonry dust and plaster, and the entire row of carcasses lurches sickeningly and slams to the floor, falling down around Hitch in a meaty thud of metal and chains and flesh. He cannot move. A ton of beef is lying across his midsection, and he cannot move. He tries to set the meat hook into the carcass next to him and pull himself out, but he can't get the right leverage and succeeds in only settling the carcass more firmly on top of him. So he takes the opposite tack and tries to slide his chest out from under the crushing weight. No, it can't be. He cannot move. Dead again. He is dead again. I'm gonna die again. The little Hitler hasn't seen him yet. The walker's claw reaches to grab a second railing and yank. The rail bends in the middle, and then a steel I-beam that runs nearly half the length of the building rips through the ceiling and lands with a shuddering jolt against the walker's shoulder, knocking it off balance. It's going to fall. It's going to land on me. The walker totters toward Hitch, for all the world resembling an angry god come to wreak havoc on a disbeliever. Hitch can see the little Hitler perched in the cockpit, his eyes bugged out with fright, his mouth stretched into a terrified "oh." And then Hitch looks away. He's unable to watch the final moment of his undoing. Please, let this be the last time I die. The walker crashes into the tangle of cattle bodies and debris, blowing out a shockwave that scatters everything around it. A mush of pulped flesh and bones squirts out from under the machine as it bounces once, then settles into the wreckage with the groaning wail of ruined metal. The claw smacks bare concrete next to Hitch's skull and leaves an eggshell tracery of fractures. The machine's big diesel sputters and coughs and dies. It had fallen just short of Hitch's body. He cranes his neck and sees the little Hitler fumbling at the restraints holding him in the cockpit. A smear of blood covers his lips and cheek, and a dislodged strand of greasy hair hangs over his eyes. He reaches for the console, and Hitch can hear a starter turning over, uselessly. The little Hitler pounds the console, and then his head slumps dejectedly, and he lets slip a cheated whisper. Hitch tries again to drag himself out from under the carcass. The little Hitler slowly raises his eyes. "You!" the man hisses. Hitch looks at him. "You fucker! Are you pleased? You've ruined it all!" He shakes his head wearily. "Everything I've worked for is gone. It's all gone. For what?" He levels a stare of unalloyed hatred at Hitch. "Why did you come here? What did you want?" Hitch pauses in his struggles. "I wanted you." "Me?" The little Hitler looks incredulous. He begins to laugh, softly at first, but gaining in volume and pitch until the walls almost shake with the echoes of his laughter. "You wanted me? For what?" "You and your machine, for a little trip up north. The machine is gone, but you're still here." "Bah!" the little Hitler snorts. "You forget, Mr. Dead Doe. The game isn't over. In fact, I still control the board." His fingers waggle over the controls, and Hitch hears electric servo motors howling to life. The claw rises from the fractured concrete, trailing lengths of bloody chain and shreds of meat. And then it dips and flicks the cow carcass from Hitch's body, as if it were brushing away an annoying mosquito. Before Hitch can roll out of its reach, the claw pounces, grabbing him by the skull and pulling him toward the crawler. The little Hitler leers from the cockpit. A triumphant black glitter has returned to his eyes, and a broad, malevolent smile creases his face. The claw pulls Hitch to a blood-stained plexiglass fairing that rims the cockpit. It stops there. The little Hitler is pointing to a toggle switch on the control board. An amber light below the switch blinks at the standby. "Do you see this, Mr. Dead Doe?" This is the instrument of your death, or should I say, your re-death. 10,000 foot-pounds of pressure available at the flip of a switch. I want you to see this, Mr. Dead Doe, because these days, life is cheap, and death is even cheaper. And all that really matters is power. This is power, the little Hitler says. His voice has gone down to a husky whisper. His finger trembles on the switch, and Hitch can feel the claw clamping down against his skull, and the plates of bone beginning to creak under the pressure. He glances 10 seconds into the future, and sees the articulated fingers of the claw coming together in a spasm of compression, and his skull flying apart like a crushed egg. And an old but familiar sensation gathers in the pit of his stomach, so that he grabs the metal fingers out of reflex and tries to pull them apart. The little Hitler giggles. Game over, Mr. Dead Doe. His fingers are white on the toggle switch. Game over. A gunshot. The little Hitler's skull explodes like a melon dropped from a skyscraper. The claw twitches open, and Hitch drops and rolls away as it crashes limply to the floor. That's right, mein Führer, the woman Dakota hisses, stepping out from behind a row of swinging carcasses. A 9mm pistol aimed at the little Hitler's corpse, jitterbugging in the cockpit seat. Game over. Just let us get the fuck out of here, the woman Dakota says. She's half-heartedly pointing the gun at Hitch. A group of people has gathered behind her. People from the pens, and a scattering of soldiers and scientists and children. The boy who had been hiding in the office has come out now and is hugging the woman Dakota's thigh, peering from behind her to watch Hitch with wide and mournful eyes. At the other end of the slaughterhouse, just beyond the wall that the little Hitler tore down with the walker to get inside, a mob of zombies stands patiently, awaiting permission to descend on a surviving band of humans. We're even now, the woman Dakota says. Her voice is tense, but Hitch can sense a firmness of resolve that wasn't there before. You betrayed me, he says. Am I supposed to forget that? She shakes her head, but doesn't take her eyes from him. I was in it for Kelly and Amy. They were all that mattered. Now they're gone, and I have to find some other reason to live. Maybe you can understand that. Hitch nods. Yes, maybe. The motor pool has trucks. Lots of trucks. Call off your dogs. She gestures toward the horror show of zombies lowing and mewling at the other end of the slaughterhouse. And let us get to those trucks. Clear a path for us so we can get out of the camp. You'll never be troubled by us again. In exchange for what? Hitch asks. She raises her eyebrows. In exchange for the bullet I'll put through your skull if you don't. Hitch sighs, and is astonished to recognize the gesture as an entirely human expression. Something has changed in him in the past few hours, something he has not had a chance to think about. He feels an anticipatory flutter in his stomach, and again is astonished to recognize it as a feeling, an emotion, something he thought had been dangling from that guardrail so many months ago. I don't think either one of us is in a position to make threats, he says. But maybe we can negotiate. For what? She says exasperatedly. Your man is dead. Your death ray is a pile of charcoal briquettes. Hell, it's a miracle the tower shielded me from the explosion, or I'd be stewed meat myself. What else is there? Something else, Hitch whispers. Something your Fuhrer mentioned. Your people over there may be able to help me. A trace of a headshake. I don't like the sound of this, she murmurs. You'll have to trust me. Oh, God, she snorts. Trust is a pretty hard thing to come by these days. I trusted you. She looks unswervingly into his eyes. The muscles in her neck flex and unflex. Then the stiffness in them vanishes, and her gaze softens. She opens her mouth to say something, hesitates for a moment, then spits it out. Okay. Then, Jesus, I hope I'm doing the right thing. Lawton, Shawnee, Okmulgee. The world unspools in the Harley's parabolic rearview mirror, a passing plain of grass and empty farms and howling wind. Joplin, Springfield, Cape Girardeau. The twin V purrs like a big cat, a healthier rumble than a dissonant, gurgling chug of the diesel trucks the woman Dakota and her Spandau refugees drove away in that night. West Frankfort, Terre Haute, Danville. Hitch smiles into the mirror. The gold H drilled into the remaining front tooth flashes light into the single lens of his Ray-Bans. Gary in South Bend. He casts a paternal glance at the new sidecar bolted onto the Harley, and its cargo, which is strapped between the seat and the floor of the sidecar. A white cone, 6 feet in length. Something the little Hitler had mentioned. Riveted metal plates. One of the lab techs in the woman Dakota's band knew where the little Hitler kept them hidden. Bands of black and white checkered patterns ringing the circumference of the base. He had led Hitch to them. Stern warnings stenciled in militarise beneath the universal red and yellow symbol for radiation. The little Hitler's private stash. A sloppily hand-lettered sign painted in red across its steel flank. Just say da to death, Commissar. And then the woman Dakota and her people had driven off into the night. Below the sign, in simple block letters, Mark 80 nuclear warhead. Effective yield, 50 kilotons. The Michigan state line. How simple and wonderful a miracle it is to feel, Hitch tells himself as the wind streams through the tattered remnants of his hair and howls through the gristly wickets of his rib bones. Even if the salient emotion is fear. It is the same fear that has driven men since the days primitive people first walked the savannah. It is the same respect for death from which every human ambition has entered the world. Power, control, hatred, fear. But human, damn it. Tragically human. Lamentably human. The source of all misery and horror and pain that makes up the experience of being human. But human, not zombie. Human. And come he slow or come he fast, it is but death who comes at last. Hitch rolls like thunder across the land, a phoenix rising from the ashes of his own Armageddon. Only now he has a place to go, and a thing to do. I will not die again. And a reason to be. The end. Read by Joe DeNoia, Chesterfield, New Jersey. November 12th, 2024.